But I'm pleased to report that we have 44% of the pastors in the 13 divisions of the World Church around the globe participating in the survey. Now, here is something discouraging for pastors. If I drew you a graph of where the church is growing fastest, what do you reckon? Is it where there's a lot of pastors per member or the other way around?
And this is where it starts to get interesting. This is the frequency of preaching the Trinity by division. And what you can look at there is you notice that now there's substantially more red in various divisions. And given that there's an anti-Trinitarian kind of crisis hitting the church, it's really surprising that so many would report not actually preaching on this.
Notice that our top goals are all fit most with the Herald Model. And then we have a little bit of a mix about community of disciples, but anything servant, any application of the community of disciples is right at the very bottom of what our pastors think is important.
My name is Rob McIver. I'm the director of the Scripture, Spirituality and Society Research Centre at Avondale University. I welcome you to this research presentation of a project associated with the centre, the Global Adventist Pastors Survey. We're going to be looking at a bit of the background of the survey and some of the first look results, and they are interesting. So I hope that you find that you share our excitement with the data that we have. All right, so who asked for this survey? Who asked for the survey? Well, the quick answer is the Future Plans Working Group of the General Conference. You probably haven't heard about that committee. It is a committee put aside for strategic planning. And on that committee is the President, Secretary, Treasurer, all of the Vice Presidents, and selected very well qualified people from the General Conference environment. So there's just a photograph of them all. That's when they look official in their suits, and that is the only combined picture I could find of the whole committee, and they must have been on a planning day or something. The people that put up the research grant application was myself, Erika Pooney, Wendy Jackson, Steve Currow, and Brendan Pratt. We liaise essentially with David Trim at the General Conference and kind of report to him. So here was our brief. Now, some of you in the room and some of you watching this video and some of you on Zoom will have done this kind of research. And you'll know that you only want 2 or 3 questions that you're looking for, okay? So the result was we had quite a large survey, and we were asking people to devote maybe 30 to 60 minutes of their life to this. And we have, I just checked, 13,771 people that did that. So I am seriously impressed. Not all of them qualified, unfortunately. You'll see when we have the tables and the N values, usually around 12 and a bit thousand. But I'm pleased to report that we have 44% of the pastors in the 13 divisions of the World Church around the globe participating in the survey. All right, so there are the divisions. I was going to point out to you the big ones. So the green on the left there is South American division. East Central Africa is the brown one, that's Kenya and thereabouts. We had, that was good results. And also we had some good results from different countries. Brazil, of course, is in the South American division, so they were bigger than everybody else. Kenya next, Indonesia. So we've got Angola, Australia, Ukraine, Zambia, Zimbabwe. So this is just fabulous data. We're very pleased. We want to thank everybody that participated. We generated the survey in a number of languages. SurveyMonkey is wonderful that way. If you do the right work, it's a bit hard work, but it will you can change from one language to the other. And so the biggest groups came in English, Indonesian, Portuguese, and Spanish. All right, well, that's a bit of a background. Let's think of the results. Adventist church pastors work in different cultures. They have different levels of experience. They have different education levels. They have many, many differences. Some work in small churches, some have 10,000 or more members. But what strikes the researchers is how similar they are. When you ask them, do you believe in the seventh-day Sabbath is the Sabbath of the Bible? They will say yes. Do you believe Jesus is coming back again soon? They will say yes. So, okay, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, those are pretty fundamental things, but they believe they were common in all sorts of things. So I want to emphasise their communality, because what we're going to do is now share some of the differences, and they're kind of interesting. All right, so here's one. Number of churches that you have in your pastoral assignment. Now, those numbers are a bit small, so we're going to do it by colour. This is one church, that's two churches, that's three churches, that's four churches, that's five or more churches. Ta-da! South American division. Pastors have got five or more churches, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, 20 or more. So if you run your eye across the different divisions, in many of the larger divisions, the church pastoral staff are looking after significant numbers of churches. Just put yourself in their shoes. How often would you be preaching at an individual church if you had 20 churches on your roster? So that changes the entire relationship between the minister and the local elders. And in those churches, they are looking after significant numbers of members. So again, let me just go through the various colours so that you can run your eye across it. So there's less than 50, 50 to 99, 100 to 149, 150 to 199, 200 to 229. So coming over to here, this is the North American division. So we have 300 to 499, we have 500 to 749. Come over here to the South American division. See, the majority would have at least 500 members. 750 to 999, 1,000 to 2,000. So again, there are dramatic differences in the amount of reach that a pastor needs to manage in different parts of the world church. Now, here is something discouraging for pastors. If I drew you a graph of where the church is growing fastest, what do you reckon? Is it where there's a lot of pastors per member or the other way around? Yeah, you worked it out. It's the other way around. Some naughty people suggest that what we need to do is diminish the number of pastors in the church. I hope they don't actually get around to that. I don't think it's a particularly good idea. So here's something interesting. The Adventist Church for many years, pretty much my whole professional career, has been asking itself, should we ordain women? So it is interesting to look across the church and see the blue on, that's males, and the other colour, what would you call that, orange? The European division has got a noticeable number of female pastors. East Central Africa, the West Africa division, and the Trans-European division has got a significant number of pastors as well. All right, more traditional demographics. Age. And again, it is interesting to look at the age profile of the different divisions. I'm going to start with the North American division. The orange is the 50 plus, and the next colour up is the 60 plus in age. So you can see a very large percentage of the ministerial workforce in the North American division is coming up to what is traditionally thought of as retirement age. And at the bottom, the light green and the darker green is 20 to 29 and 30 to 39. And then again, if we look at where the church pastoral force is youngest, it's in the Inter-American division, it's in the South American division, it's in the SID, and then the SSD, which is Philippines, etc. UUC, by the way, is Ukraine. It was separated from Russia. It used to be part of the same division. Your education is also interesting. By the way, let me pay tribute to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They run a very large education system, including tertiary education, and they care about equipping their workforce, ministerial workforce, and also the workforce working in the schools and universities. This is an enormous investment in people. So the Adventist Church has got a very deep and rich human resource, social capital they call that. So, as you can see, there are some divisions where secondary school is common enough that it shows up on the graph. The red colour is a bachelor's degree, and that is kind of the de facto standard, although the church is trying to move most ministers to a master's degree, at least. Now, our next presenter is going to be Neil, followed by Wendy. Thank you very much.
And my part was to look at the preaching, what topics pastors preach on, which is kind of interesting. Initially, when I looked at that, I thought, oh yeah, this won't be that revealing. The data would just be, like there's topics they get to preach on. But the more we drilled down into the data, the more interesting it actually became and revealed some significant trends, which, depending on your perspective, may actually be reasonably concerning. So this related to question 67 in the survey, and the question was simply this. In the last 12 months, approximately how many times have you preached on the following topics in your local church? These were the topics that we had. They covered all the essentials of what it means to preach around Christ, Adventist distinctives, looking at cultural kind of topics relating to creation, remnant, 1844, Daniel and Revelation, Pauline epistles, Sabbath, inspiration, authority of Scripture, and so on. So all the basics of what we might be interested in there, they were the topics. Out of those, from all of the people in the survey, the pastors who reported, the top 5 most frequent things that they preached on were these. The experience of salvation, that was number 1. The second one is the second coming, which is kind of gratifying, right? Because we're Adventists, so that's kind of good. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is another feature. Stewardship is number 4, which is kind of interesting. It's like, so for all of our treasurers, I guess you can breathe a sigh of relief. There's going to be money still in the coffers at the end of the day. So that's kind of neat. And then the Sabbath is right there, which means if you go back to looking at what are the key identity teachings of the church, it's those 3 that are highlighted. They're the ones that people will most often resonate and say, yeah, these are the ones that are identity messages, and they're being preached throughout the globe in a really frequent kind of way. If we look at the flip side of that, though, what are the topics that are least preached? So the numbers there, 26%, are referring to the number who would have 0. In other words, they're not preaching on this topic at all. So 26% of pastors report that in their church or churches, they're not preaching on Adventist education. And when I first thought about that, I'm like, oh, wow, that could be a thing, right? That may be a concern. Or maybe it's just a sign that there's no Adventist church nearby. There's no Adventist school nearby the church, and so it's just not on their radar. Or it could be that there is an Adventist school right there and they don't need to preach on it because the school comes in and they're regularly doing things. So that really needs further exploration. Topics addressing local beliefs and practices, that might be, the various cultural things which you might want to speak against or along those sort of lines, that's not really being touched on. And then we come to things like Adventist health message, sanctuary in 1844, the gift of prophecy, the Trinity, and the remnant. And you can look at the numbers there. Now, this is for the total survey result. And you look at that and you go, wow, there's a sizable group of pastors who aren't touching these subjects. What gets interesting is when we break that down into different ways. If we look at the global focus on Jesus. So these are the topics that really you might say would relate to Jesus, and they're all in the green. So I use a traffic light color system. Green is good or positive, or we might think of that as something that would be desirable, and red would be undesirable. So in the graphs coming, just look at that. So green is good, red is like cause for thought. We need to think more about, well, what's going on here? And you can see there that there's solidly the right-hand column, 87% are preaching 3 to 5 or more times on these topics. And that's really solid result. So the preaching of Christ, you'd have to say from this, the church is being Christ-centered. And I think that's a really nice result, considering all the things that you could come to preach on. The distinctives in red, maybe, this is cause for concern, and you go, So the least preach, and you can see there the same numbers we looked at before, and these are all of the ones, so these are the bottom 7, if you like, of least preached. So the remnant, Christian marriage, the Trinity, Sanctuary in 1844, the gift of prophecy, topics addressing cultural beliefs and practices, the holistic Adventist health message and Adventist education is the bottom of that list. And it's like, is there cause for concern when you look at that? Or is there a surprise when you see that list? Or is you're looking at that list and you think, well, there's no surprise at all for some of those things being on that list, okay? Really depends how you view that and through which lens. So if we look at these now in cross-tabulation by division, again, in the same order that Rob's were presented, this is the same, but here's the going from red through to amber, green, and different shades of green. And this is the frequency of salvation by division. And you can see there that pretty much it's green, and this is what I want you to notice, is the trend of green. So looking at that, and you'd say the trend of green is, wow, the experience of salvation, pretty uniformly preached. There's not a lot of variation. And for those who are in like Trans-European Division or ESD or EUD or NAD, and there's some who are not preaching that, it's like, did they not understand the question? Did they hit the button wrong? Or do we really need to come and have a conversation with them? Not sure, right? In looking at this, I called that the sort of background level of response. It's like, okay, maybe things are happening in the local church, they have to deal with certain things, and so maybe that's the background radiation level of what a no response might look like to that. But if we go to something like this, and this is where it starts to get interesting, this is the frequency of preaching the Trinity by division. And what you can look at there is you notice that now there's substantially more red in various divisions. And given that there's an anti-Trinitarian kind of crisis hitting the church, it's really surprising that so many would report not actually preaching on this. Or if we were to look at the state of the dead, there's again more red appearing. Or if we go to something like the Sanctuary in 1844, quite interesting when you look at that, how much red there is. So as I finish up today, I just want to leave you with this kind of observation. It's impossible to use yesterday's solutions for today's problems. And I wonder as I look at the data, whether the shift that is happening in secular society is if that is a response to the needs in which the pastors are finding themselves, and they're actually looking outside of the traditional doctrines that we might have as a church to reach and build bridges to the local community in which they find themselves serving. Don't know that for certain, but I think what it actually says is there's more opportunities to study, there's more opportunities to explore this data set to actually find out what is going on there. It would be really easy to look at this and go, oh, wow, there's mission shift taking place. I don't know whether that is the case, because when you look at other data in the survey, the pastors are very firmly, in terms of their belief system, very firmly Adventist, but when it comes to their practice, it seems that their practice is reasonably different. So that's where I'll leave it with you to think about that, and I'll hand over to Wendy. Thanks, Wendy.
Well, thank you. I am moving in a slightly different direction from this survey because I'm a theologian. I like a little bit of theology as well, but I'm looking at the theology coming out of the practices. And so what I'm looking at specifically is the ecclesiology of Adventist pastors, how are they actually practicing church, their understanding of church, based on how they understand the mission of the church, rather than asking them specifically, what do you believe that the church is about? Okay, so we're going from the idea of mission. Now, so my research questions are as follows. How did pastors understand the mission of the church? And then, well, what does this say about the ecclesiology that they actually embrace? When we think about this question, there's a lot of things that might influence the way you think about mission. So potentially how your commitment is to Christianity as a whole, how your commitment is specifically to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and its 28 fundamentals, what's happening in the community around you, what's happening in the culture around you, because theology is never done in a vacuum, right? As much as we would like to think we just read the Bible and this is the theology, the reality is we do theology in the context that we're actually in. What is the level of education of the person? How actively involved have they been individually in potentially service activities or spiritual activities of the church? And so forth, right? There are lots of other things we could put on here, but you can see there are lots of different things that might contribute to how they understand the mission of the church. So we had several questions that are relevant. The first one was an open-ended question. If I were asked, what is the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I would say, well, clearly I can't present you 13,500 open-ended answers today. So I've picked just a few representative ones here. And what is happening is that these open-ended questions are actually going to be going through in vivo analysis to look for themes, but we're not quite that far with it just at the moment. But here's some examples. So from the North American division, for instance, share Jesus' gospel through love, hope and wholeness, help people to know and love and follow Jesus, to make disciple-making disciples. Or here in our own division, to grow disciples and lead others into a relationship with Jesus and his people, to share the gospel of Jesus with others and prepare them for the soon return of Christ, to go and preach and teach, to tell the story of Jesus and his love for the world, and so forth. If we go to languages other than English, and these are translations, so from the SAD we have a translation here from Portuguese, taking the gospel to the world, getting people ready to encounter Jesus, preaching the gospel to every creature, presenting Jesus in all your activities, or from the Inter-European division, and these are translations from the German. Note that the Germans seem to be writing much longer responses than some of the other divisions. And I noticed that actually in some of the teacher servers that there was some divisions wrote much longer answers than others, and the SPD and the NAD wrote the shortest ones. So living and demonstrating faith in life, inviting people to Jesus, preaching the threefold angelic message in an understandable and relevant Christocentric way. The mission is to develop the love between God and man and the love for one another in such a way that society from the outside recognises God's love within it. So quite a bit more thought had gone into some of these responses from the European division, but some very common themes that are coming through on all of them. Well, we then had another question, and this question is basically, please rate what you think the worldwide Seventh-day Adventist Church should be doing. All right? Pick out those that you think are the 2 or 3 most important, and then choose one option from below for every goal that's listed, right? So you can choose that it shouldn't be a goal of the church, that, well, it's not that important, but probably should be a goal, I'm kind of neutral about it. It's important, it should be, but not in the top 1 or 2. It should be in the top 1 or 2, or really I don't think it applies, right? So that's kind of the question. So 2 things to notice here. First of all, we're looking at what are the top goals? And second, I'm going to focus, the other one is on what should not be a goal. Now recognize, because this was only one of the options that could be chosen, you could choose to not tick this for any goal, right? You might think all of them should be goals. So you could potentially get 0 for something. Now this is going to be a very busy slide, and I apologize in advance, but it's the colors that I want you to concentrate on here. So once again, you have the divisions going across the screen. The ones that are in yellow, right? The ones that are in yellow, that is, share Jesus with the world, lead people to Jesus, and prepare people for the second coming. You can see that they are the top 3 choices for almost every division. Right? So the similarity there in understanding those things. Just a couple of variations. You can see that in our own division, in fact, discipleship trumped the preparation for the second coming. And you can also see in the Southern Asian division that teaching a biblical viewpoint trumped sharing Jesus with the world. Okay, so, but overall, fairly consistently saying, yes, these are the top 3 goals our church should have. The orange represents the next 2 down, right? So what has after those top 3, the number of pastors who said that this should be, if I rank them all right, so if I go, okay, 70% of pastors said this one, so the next 2 coming down in the divisions, and you can see, again, fairly consistent, right, in orange. So discipleship coming in number 4 for most divisions, except for, again, SPD, where we had that reverse, and in the SUD, where increasing attendance actually took number 4. And number 5, this teaching a biblical viewpoint, right? So, okay, so we've got kind of saying things as kind of the number 1, and then we've got discipling and teaching is coming in as number, in those 4 and 5 slots, right? So we start with I'm saying a lot of things, right? I'm talking about Jesus. I'm talking about preparing people for second coming. So a lot of talking about things. And then the next bit is kind of a bit more of the teaching about things. Now, the things that you see in blue here are the bottom ranked goals, the least ranked goals. And these are a bit more spread. But what fascinates me is which things they relate to. Advocating for justice. Only 7% of people thought this should be a high goal in the division of SAD, for instance. In our own division, it was sitting at around 10.5. We actually had one of the higher divisions in terms of thinking this was of relevance as an important goal for the church. Then you have a look at teaching an ethical viewpoint, convincing people of Seventh-day Adventist doctrine, and reducing poverty. Right? Those are the lowest ranked goals in terms of the number of people saying this should be in the top 2 or 3 goals. Now, if we go to the option should not be a goal, again, the yellow represents the most people saying this should be not a goal. And again, where are most of them? Advocating for justice and teaching an ethical viewpoint, convincing Adventist doctrine, and reducing poverty. So there's consistency between the actual total numbers who tick whether it should be an important goal or not, and those who tick should not be a goal. What is particularly interesting is the 2 divisions, the South American division at 34.8%, say that advocating for justice should not be a goal of the church. And in the ESD, which was Euro-Asian division, where 26% said this should not be a goal. And now, I think in the South American division, that's an impact of the liberation theology. Not quite sure what's impacting the other one, but some interesting things nevertheless. So let me just jump here then and say there are several models of the church that we could think about. We can think of it as an institution that's all about its authority, its power, and its structure and its hierarchy. We can think about it as something to do with it's something, a mystical body of Christ. We can think of it as giving grace to the world. We can think of it as a herald. We can think of it as a servant. Or we could think of it as a community of disciples that is trying to disciple. And if I come here and I put it in the order that the goals were actually ranked, notice that our top goals are all fit most with the Herald Model. And then we have a little bit of a mix about community of disciples, but anything servant, any application of the community of disciples is right at the very bottom of what our pastors think is important. Scary. So I want to end, Rob, with the well-known quote from Ministry of Healing. Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching people. The Saviour mingled with people as one who desired the good. He showed their sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, won their confidence, and then invited them to follow me. I won't read the second paragraph, but it kind of expands on that. But we've said that that's our bottom goal.
We don't have time to share with you the fact that 93% of pastors said they're in the place that God has called me to be. 91% agreed that being a pastor seems to fit my gifts and talents. 79% felt that their work as a church pastor helps them fulfill their own call of God. 94% said I serve the mission of the church through my work. 89% said I made a personal commitment to Jesus Christ. There's a lot of good news in this survey. A lot of very committed pastors working in all parts of the globe under pretty strenuous circumstances, many of them. So I want to leave you with that thought. I want to thank the 13,000 people that invested some of their life helping us out in the survey. I want to thank the General Conference for funding the survey and giving us this amazing opportunity. We were very conscious of the fact we were able to have a big impact on the direction of the church, and we are very careful in how we report our data because we realise that it has the potential for a big impact. I want to thank Avondale and all of the people at local divisions. The translators, the number of people that were involved in this survey is very, very large. So without them, we couldn't help. By the way, here's a gratuitous advertisement. If you go onto the Avondale website, look at research, look at the Scripture, Spirituality and Society Research Centre, look at our projects, and go to the projects on the Institutional Workers Survey, you will see that fabulous video, which was presented at a similar group to this about 12 months ago. So that's there. Thank you for being here. Greatly appreciated. Can you thank the presenters? And until next year, we'll have 2 of these presentations next year. I've got a couple of interesting ideas already, so we'll see what happens. Thank you.